So, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us in our video conference held at the Powerhouse Museum. Today we have our lovely guest, Nikki. She is a marker, she is a HSC marker in D&T. And we have Lucy Klippan, who is a visual designer. Let's begin. So I'll pass it over to Lucy.
Hi everyone, really excited to be talking to you all today. I can see some of you, which is nice, and I believe there are more of you out there in the ether. So my name is Lucy, as Jenny mentioned, and I work just down the street from where I am at the moment at UTS. I'm never quite sure of the best way to describe what I do, but I have always loved to draw, and I'm now basically a visual designer. I work with Designing Out Crime, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later, but first I'll tell you briefly about how my fairly random path has led me to where I am now. So after I finished high school, I travelled for a bit and then had to decide between two very different paths that I found quite interesting. One was nursing and then the other was something creative, either design or art. And I chose the creative route and enrolled in the Bachelor of Fine Arts at what is now UNSW Art Design, but back then it was COFA, College of Fine Arts. And I majored in printmaking there, and it gave me a license to really experiment with different ways of image making, and that was a really valuable time that I sometimes wish I could have back again, because once you leave uni, that type of experimentation, it becomes harder and harder to keep doing. So that was sort of where I started, and then after that I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I decided to try and find a stable career. So first I tried working in retail. I worked in marketing and visual merchandising, and it was a bit of an odd choice, wasn't really a great fit, so I stuck it out for a little while, and then I was offered a job working in the public sector, New South Wales public sector, and I thought this would be another sensible thing to do for a short period of time. And then 2.5 years later, I realised that while I may have learned quite a lot, I was pretty creatively unfulfilled. So I went back to uni and I did a Master of Design at UTS, where I learnt about lots of different applications for design. And for the first time, it got me asking the question, why is it only architects who get to design places? I also undertook a subject which was called Design in the Community, which blended a design approach with a social focus. So this really opened my eyes to very different opportunities for myself as a visual designer. And it led me to where I'm now working, the Designing Out Crime Research Centre. So this is, as it says on the slide there, it was established almost 10 years ago. It's a partnership between the New South Wales Department of Justice and the University of Technology. And we use design and innovation methods to tackle complex social problems, so community safety, incarceration, and different health-related issues. So we try and make sense of it through using a design process. While there's still a lot of sketching, talking about ideas and that traditional design work, a lot of what we do actually looks more like this. There's lots of collaborative work where we involve people, different stakeholders in the design process, and we're constantly testing and reshaping ideas as we go. Today I just thought I'd talk quickly through one case study. One thing that we've been working on recently, some of us in the team, is this project on court appearances by video. So in the Department of Justice and in Corrections New South Wales, this is called AVL, which just stands for Audio Visual Link. But the specific context here is that inmates who are in prison and need to appear in court, increasingly they're doing this via a video link. So just like we're talking now, and this has really changed quite a lot of what is already quite a complex process. So we were asked in the centre to have a look at this whole experience and see how it could be improved, because currently the systems and processes are catching up with the technology. So to begin with, we talked to a lot of inmates and staff within correctional centres and courts and other people within the Justice Department. This image is of a journey map that was done at Bathurst Correctional Centre in conversation with a number of inmates about their experience of participating in these court appearances via video. And we used this to start identifying different stages where improvements could be made in different parts of the services and systems and products that were available to improve the overall experience. So this is an image of what a current AVL studio looks like in prisons at the moment. As you can see, they're not particularly nice. This is within a prison where an inmate would be appearing in court from there. So it doesn't really reflect the formality of going to court. And so this was redesigned by some of the other members in our team. On the left you see the new design for that suite, and on the right is the whole area within the prison where that includes a waiting room and a transition space for people to go into their court appearance. And they redesigned, this is a mock-up of a redesigned podium and screen display that would be in the courtroom to better present the inmate who is defending themselves. Because at the moment there's a screen on the wall which is sort of quite high up, and it's really not like having a person in the room at all. So that affects the kind of court processes and the perceptions of that defendant by everyone in the courtroom. Another part, which was sort of my key part in this project, was in trying to demystify this whole process for inmates through a set of communication materials. So we designed a set of over 50 handheld cards with tips on different parts of the process. These were designed to be very accessible, very clear, very visual, because there were high levels of illiteracy within prisons, and to really cover a full spectrum of technical issues through to court processes, etc. We also designed a glossary, which was a plain English language version that covered a whole number of very complicated legal terms, and a simple notebook that contained some tips for inmates, but also just space to write down notes and things, because it's amazing how much of a difference it makes to just have a bit of paper and a pen to write something down in a designated spot. There was also a banner that would be displayed in the waiting room. So often when inmates are waiting for their court appearance, they will be put into a room or cell while they're waiting for an unknown period of time before they're told that they can go into their appearance. So this was, again, giving some very clear visual steps so that they know they're actually going to be waiting around quite a long time. They might be able to go to this person for support. This is what's going to happen during your appearance, etc. So there were a number of different, this is running through this project very quickly, so apologies if it's a bit confusing, but there were a number of different components within it. But really they all work together to improve that overall experience and journey of people going through a court appearance. It made improvements both on the inmate defendant side, but also on the court side. It was clearer for everyone involved. And the last thing that I'll say before I finish talking is that I would just say that, like life, the path of a design project is very much not linear. So often we think that we're going from a simple point from here to there, and that it would be very straightforward. But actually it looks much more like this, or like this, where you realise that what you were aiming for in the first place is not where you need to be at all. But the good thing to remember is that's okay. It's all part of being open to different possibilities and opportunities that come up as they unfold. Thank you, and good luck with your own projects.
Thank you for your lovely presentation. Now, I had a few questions about your kind of design collaborative process. How much of it, or like, can you tell us a bit about who you kind of
Involved in the process? Yep. So we try hard to include people at each of the stages in a design project. So the way that we work very much focuses to begin with on understanding the problem really well. So we might meet with everyone who's affected by a particular problem in terms of people who are impacted by it, people who can make changes to improve that process, anyone else who we think might be connected to it. And we would start having conversations with them to really understand their experience of that and what that particular problem is like from their perspective. We start building a good picture of that, as well as whatever background research that we would be doing as well. And then when we get to testing out different ideas, we would be coming back to those same groups of people to test whether they're actually hit the mark, whether they are going to be, viable or not. And then if they're not, then we make changes and we go back to them again. So that it's quite an iterative process, and there are also periods where we will hand over sections of an idea creating process to the stakeholders themselves. So, what do you think about this? What are your ideas for this? And we try to sort of really strengthen the underlying themes for whatever design ideas we take forward.
So with the kind of project brief that you received, is that something you would receive from like the department, and then they'll come in and ask you to?
It can be. We do work for the Justice Department, and that project that I talked about, that definitely involved them, but it doesn't have to be. So we do work a lot with different public sector agencies, and because a lot of our work is sort of focused on that, trying to find ways to produce positive social outcomes, then it is often linked to the public sector, but it doesn't have to be. It can be anyone really coming to us with a problem, and complex problem.
That's awesome. I know that in the past you did some work with kind of the local community, especially regions where in Sydney where the locals immigrants and they don't really speak English. How would you kind of work with them if English is not like their first language?
Yeah, it can be really challenging, and it's something that comes up. It has come up not just in that project, but in a few different things that we've worked on. And it's actually a really good way of testing whether something you've designed to be accessible to a broad audience is actually working or not. Because we all come to whatever project we've got with a very specific perspective, and there's nothing like presenting that to someone else to actually challenge whether that's working or not. And ultimately, as a designer, you're working to produce something that will fulfill a need, and you want that to be taken up and be used by the people you're designing for. So really, the best thing I think you can do is to try and keep language like fairly simple, really cut to the point of what you want to say, use visuals as much as possible. Obviously this is from my perspective as a graphic designer, that's where I'm coming from, and really try and work with people and translators if that's appropriate to find a common language between you.
Generally, how big were your collaborations? Like, how big were your groups that you're working with?
That's a really good question. I think the size of the group kind of depends on what outcome you're looking for. So if you're wanting to get a broad sweep on an issue and generate ideas, or kind of get a general sense of issues that are really bothering people, then larger groups can work quite well. But often when it comes to refining and getting into the nitty-gritty of retesting ideas, small groups can work quite well. So you would do multiple sessions with smaller groups as opposed to one big thing, because the big sessions can be a bit superficial sometimes.
I was just going to say that from the HSC marking perspective, like this kind of example is perfect to see how Lucy has not only using collaboration in the early stages in the project proposal, looking at all the different stakeholders that might be involved and getting them involved early and getting that so it becomes not about Lucy or the designer's concepts, but it's about getting that genuine need and getting their views and taking that into consideration to write that brief that you're going to eventually write. And then it go ongoing, like you're saying, with the testing and the experimentation, inviting them to participate in that all the way through, and so that the solution that is that you're trying to achieve is somehow related back to that original need.
Absolutely, and I think that people who are involved throughout the process then feel like they have a bit more ownership over whatever comes out of it as well, so it doesn't belong to just one person. It's kind of really feel like it can be owned by everyone who is involved in the process.
We were just wondering if people were on the team, the qualifications that they have.
I think you're asking about the design team, which what kind of qualifications they had. So in the design team for that project I talked about, we had a industrial designer or two industrial designers, an architect, an environmental psychologist. There were a number of people from within corrective services and sort of technical specialists as well, and myself as a graphic designer, and then another service designer helping us out. So it was quite multidisciplinary. There are also a number of academics who had been sort of researching this for a long time who were able to contribute to the process as well.
Thank you. And one last question from us was, how did you evaluate your success?
How do we evaluate our success? That's a good question too, and often we don't really, it can be hard to have a really good opportunity to do that because we'll get to the end of a project and we kind of need that extra time to be able to go back and see how well things really worked. So the project I talked about is still, that's about to be trialled. It hasn't actually gone into place yet. The early responses we've had from people have been really good, but we would definitely be wanting to put that into place, trial it, and then come back and talk to people to see how that really worked, see whether the materials were being used, see whether it makes a difference, for example. In previous projects, there was one also in the corrective services area where the team redesigned or designed a new intensive learning facility for a maximum security prison on the mid-north coast. And after a year of that being in place, they went back and did a full evaluation of that with a number of surveys. There's also a PhD student who happens to be researching that now, and they looked at the difference in certificate completions that the students had gone through, the general sense of well-being for the students and staff who were involved, and those sorts of things. So they're the indicators, I suppose, we look for.
Can I add with that, if you're going to be relating it back to your own design projects, then potentially you don't have that extra year to go back in there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So if you were going to do something like that, it would be maybe going back to the target audience, like you said,
yes.
And at least getting that initial sort of feedback from them.
Yeah, definitely.
In regards to, we've seen your D&T, we set up a criteria to evaluate success of our design project. What sort of criteria did you specifically set out, or how do you know you're reaching those goals along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think the objectives that we set, we're often sort of quite careful because of the type of work we do. It is really exploratory. We try to avoid setting very specific markers in terms of the product will look like this and this is exactly the function it'll do, because we do a lot of exploring of what we actually need to do before we get to that point. So our objectives are more about improving experiences and producing better outcomes for the people who are using who are going through whatever process we're talking about. And so it's usually a kind of process of working with the client to define exactly what their real bugbears are and what we can offer, and then finding a sort of simple way of describing those without locking us into a very specific product deliverable.
Could I ask a question for Lucy? If with the major works, you have to show a range of skills and use of technologies. So in your projects, So what kind of range of skills would you have shown, or in technologies did you use?
Well, we do a lot of we do a lot of lo-fi work in terms of lots of discussions and sketching and writing our ideas out first. But then when it comes to the actual design work, there's you know, for the graphic design thing, there's the full Adobe suite that is being used heavily, and then the industrial designers are working in Rhino and other CAD products to draw up all of their designs, etc. There was also quite a lot of technical stuff that was happening within this particular project that was thinking about how the different video systems could connect to different courts and to understand what technologies could be possible within that.
And what did your prototypes look like? Were there how many of them would have you've laid out?
Well, we did so many prototypes of the communication materials, particularly because they have an image on the front and text on the back, and both images and text had to be shown to so many people, and everyone had changes for them. So that was just printed out quickly, quick and dirty, basically, on the office printer. But even having something tangible like that was really powerful as something for people to respond to. In terms of the physical products, there's actually an exhibition on in Sydney at the moment at the Downing Centre for that particular project. For anyone who's joining us from Sydney, that's on all this week, and you can actually see a mock-up of that ABL suite, which is produced in cardboard, actually, cardboard and plywood. And there's a mock-up of the courtroom as well, and the podium for the courtroom was produced in plywood too, but cardboard worked in the earlier stages as well.
A quick question from another person in chat. What was the time frame for the project?
For that was done over several months. Not all of our projects are quite that long, but this one started. This is the second stage of another project, so it started about a year ago and is wrapping up and being handed over, dead and done now. So really over a year.
Thank you to Lucy and to Nikki for coming in and giving us some of their time to, you know, explain to us more about the design process and all the kind of the factors involved in making a project and realizing it. So I'd like to thank Lucy. And
Thank you.
and thanks to you guys for joining us as well.